You are now listening to the Dual Position Podcast.
The boys are back to talk all things SuperCoach all season long.
Please welcome your hosts, Whisperer and Brew.
Not just joined by Brew and myself today, we have two wonderful guests. We're here to talk draft more than anything. It's a bit hard to discuss Classic in the middle of November when we don't have prices available, but we are joined by Tom from FIGJAM Sports. How you going, mate?
Oh, sick, mate. That's good.
Good.
So excited to be here. It's like Christmas Day.
Yeah, mate. Thanks for coming on. I've obviously joined you on a numerous amount of times discussing all things NFL. But yeah, good to have you on for the draft chat. And we're also joined by Ryan from SuperCoach365. You guys that would have listened to the podcast last year, we had Ryan on to discuss the rule changes, and we got pretty detailed about that. So who knows what's going to come up with the draft. Ryan, how are we going?
Yeah, good. Thanks, boys. Good to be here. It's November, but SuperCoach, it never sleeps. So well and truly in the off season at the moment, but all eyes on 2022. And as you say there, we caught up back end of the 21 season, Josh, and it was to chat the scoring and does it need to change? Will it change heading into the new year? And it's all on the back of one man, and one man that's going to feature in this chat pretty heavily, I think.
Definitely. Look, the rules for today are we just did a top 20 draft board. We weren't drafting a team per se, so maybe there's some selections might not make sense. Tom can discuss his first two picks, and that would not make sense in a traditional SuperCoach standpoint, but for everyone watching on YouTube, you'll see the visual in front of us here. For you guys watching on, listening on Spotify or Apple, I encourage you to come and check out the YouTube. It's the exact same name as the podcast. A lot of visuals coming up, so we'll be sort of discussing them, pointing towards them, and using them for more debate. But the draft order, off the top of my head, I think it went Ryan, myself, Brew, and then Tom. We're doing a snake order and just a mock draft, basically, and we're going off last year's scoring. Not that it matters, but I've sort of just put this as a no captain's league, but not that really. I don't really think that affects the order too much. So we'll lead things off with Ryan. With the number one pick, mate, I don't think it's a surprise here as to who we're taking.
Yep, hinted at it just a moment ago, but Tom Trbojevic, just a clear standout here. And what he brings to SuperCoach is unlike any other player, and really proved himself on the injury front last year. He stayed fit and worthy number one pick for next season.
Now, look, we'll go discussion in order of the way that you guys can see it on screen. It'll go me, Brew, Tom, then Ryan. He's made his pick. I'll give my initial thoughts on Turbo. There's not too much to discuss here. I do think there is a regression on the cards. 143 average or whatever it is ridiculous. I don't think that can be maintained. But I still think the regression will be far and away superior. Then the next best man, Brew.
Well, Tom Trbojevic, he had to be number one, didn't he? Even if there is regression, I think he's still clearly number one by a very great distance. So good pick, Ryan. I support it.
Mr. Joe
Yeah,
Burrow.
and as we do this... Oh, sorry.
No, you go, Ryan, mate, you go.
Yeah, as we do this, it is November, and important to say it's we are drafting this on the basis or with the thinking of the scores are remaining the same for 2022, which they may not. And you mentioned regression there, Whisper, and it's obviously something to consider. And, you know, we can only work with what's in front of us here and going off the scores from last year. Suddenly, if they cut attacking stats in half, and Tommy may not go as a number one pick, which is surprising given how well he was or how much better he was than everyone else last season.
Exactly. Tom, yep. I'm assuming you don't have any disagreement with this first pick?
No, that's fine.
No, mate.
I mean, you're going to, even if they cut the tries back to 10 points and line breaks back to, I don't know, half of what they are now, he's still 20 points
far and away
second. Yeah.
100%. And I agree with that. Like you can reduce the scoring, but you're not going to reduce the amount of tries and try assists that Tom can create that other people simply cannot create. And I think that puts him well and truly number one by a country mile.
Exactly. Look, I've got the number two pick, and believe it or not, there was some consideration behind taking the man who's gone third, but we have decided to land on Nathan Cleary as the second pick. No real surprise there. By far and away the best halfback. It is not close in a position that is pretty thin. You've got one absolute premium and then probably one next best, depending on where someone later in this draft will fall, believe it or not. I think he could be in for a good year. But Nathan Cleary at 2, I don't really think I think these first two picks sort of pick themselves, Brew.
Yeah, look, you could debate that there's other people that could have gone at 2, who we'll talk about a little bit later, but positionally, Cleary is far and away the best. I think he's got a long way actually to go positionally in terms of points per season. I think he's got a lot more to offer. He hasn't come into his best football yet, in my opinion. The next few years of his career are probably going to be the best years of his career. So can he top Tom Trbojevic? Probably not. But as a goal-kicking halfback in the best team in the competition, which is proven by the Premiership, they're starting next year as Premiership favourites. I don't think you can go wrong picking Nathan Cleary, and you've definitely got to start in that position, a position that is lacking probably of studs for next year.
Number 2 overall pick, Tom. No disagreements here.
No, it's fine.
All right, that's Ryan. If you want to weigh in on the Cleary debate, I'm assuming you're of a similar opinion with the rest of us, though.
Yeah, he has to be number 2 for mine. I actually had him as number 1 pick overall last year, which raised some eyebrows, purely off the thinking of halfback being such a thin. It's a shallow position there, and the next best doesn't kick goals. I mean, Teddy was everyone's number 1 pick last year, but I went with Cleary for that number of reasons we've already touched on there. But looking here, he just falls behind Tommy Turbo for mine.
With the 3rd overall pick, it's up to Brew.
Yeah, so with pick number 3 of the draft, Brew picked Ryan Poppenhausen. Now, Pappy last year at the start of the season started hot, and I'll go into that a little bit. So over the first 5 games of last year, Ryan Poppenhausen averaged 117.4. Now, in that period, I should note that he averaged nearly 20 points in goal kicking, but that's probably not surprising how Melbourne went last year. He obviously then went down with concussion. He went down with injury. We saw the rise of Nico Hines. He then did a time split upon his return to protect him. Over the last 3 games of the season, we finally did see Pappenhausen play 80 minutes again. Over those 3 games, he averaged over 100. Now, in those games, he only averaged 8 points for goal kicking. So if you give him those extra 12 points, he's pretty close to his season average. And for that reason, I think that Pappenhausen can challenge Tom Trbojevic for the number 1 fullback spot. Do I think he can beat him? Maybe, probably not. But in terms of how far above Turbo was everyone last year in this draft, I'm definitely going to take the person who I think can challenge him the most, and that is Ryan Poppenhausen.
Yeah, look, I alluded to Pappenhausen with the number 2 pick. I am huge on him. I said on this podcast a few weeks ago that I think he is the number 1 must-have player when it comes to classic, just in terms of price point and the others around him. I really like Pappenhausen. I think he can challenge those top 2 picks. A lot of people would disagree with Tedesco, and that's totally fine. If you draft Teddy at 3, I'm not hating that at all. I am huge on Pappenhausen, and I feel like if Turbo does regress a little bit and Pappenhausen does increase as what we expect he will, they might be a little bit closer together, and that's where I feel the value comes in classic. But for draft, it is hard not to take Turbo number 1, but Pappenhausen, I definitely a solid 3 if you fall to that spot in your draft, Tom.
Yeah, I did a bit of research on Pappenhausen because of my next pick, and I won't get onto that pick just yet, but Pappenhausen, I was actually quite surprised. The games he played at 80 minutes, his base and power was 60 points. For a bloke that size, to have a base and power of 60 points, I thought that was huge when I went through all these games. He averaged 115 points in games he played 80 minutes, like 1.32 points per minute. That, for such a little guy, that base number, I expected it to be 40, 42. And when I added it up, it was like 58.9 or something. I was like, Jesus.
Did that include his
that's a good
goal
pick.
kicking, Tom?
No, just what is it? Base and evade or whatever it is on the SuperCoach Stats website.
This is just a personal preference, but for me, I actually include goal kicking for goal kickers as part of their B+P.
Yeah, good point.
I might not include it at the point of their peak, but I try and find an average and add that to their BP player, and then you'll get a rough guide of where their real floor is. So if you're saying, what was the figure that you said that he had for base plus power?
60.
So let's say we go with 8, which was the floor that he had at the end of the season where he was splitting time with Hines. That's nearly 70 average. And that's with
on his worst day,
those crazy games. That is awesome.
Yeah. Ryan, what are your thoughts on Pap at 3? Can you get behind him potentially being a 2 if people are worried about Nathan Cleary's injury being out for a month?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we all agree that Ryan Pappenhausen is, if not the best fullback option behind Turbo, he's definitely right up there in the conversation. And I would die on the Ryan Pappenhausen hill. I drafted him at 3 in my own league last year, and obviously not to know the impact and the season that Nico Hines would have. And I think Pappenhausen came back a different player after the concussion knocks as the one that we saw before. When he was just in a league of his own, and we spoke about Ryan Pappenhausen to start the year the way we spoke about Tom Trbojevic towards the back end. So absolutely, I think Pappenhausen back now into his 5th season of NRL. I think you mentioned his courage for a smaller fullback. Definitely I can see him taking the line a little bit more this year with obviously a little bit more confidence back in the body and in the head as well. So Ryan Pappenhausen, pick number 3, I can't argue with.
Now, Tom, on the turn, pick number 4.
Yeah, now we weren't actually drafting a team here. So my 2 picks, I did have to clarify this before I took my 2 picks. We're just ranking the top 20 players. At pick 4, I've taken Tedesco, fairly clear. Now, if I was being honest, I would highly consider taking Tedesco at 3 if it was my own draft. And that is because I'm going to gamble on Luke Cleary this year. I think Luke Cleary is going to have a monster year this year. Tedesco had if I can say shit, for Tedesco's standards, he had a fairly shit year in 2021. It was still his 2nd highest season for total SuperCoach points. And Luke Cleary missed 90% of the season. So I'm gambling on Luke Cleary to have a massive year, which means that Tedesco is going to go huge. So I've taken Teddy at 4. I'm very happy with getting him at 4.
We'll swap things up. Ryan, do you want to lead us off with Tedesco?
I think, further to Tom's point there, the impact of Cleary upon Teddy to start the year in 2021, that is, first 3 rounds from Teddy, 162, 111, 74. Of course, Cleary went down in round 3 against Souths with that ACL tear. So shows you there, I don't know what the quick maths is, 340 divided by 3. It's over 100 average Tedesco when Cleary was in the team to start the year last year. I mentioned already that Teddy was everyone's number 1 pick, if not 99.9% of everyone's draft league's number 1 pick last year. And he justified it, I think, with those numbers, and obviously had that bit of a lull in the middle of the year, but finished with a wet sail, a couple of scores in the 90s and 2 scores over 100, one of those being 182 in round 23 against the Dragons. So it just shows you, on his day, when running red hot, James Tedesco most certainly could be a top 3 pick, but falls to number 4 here.
Now, you two boys have covered pretty much everything when it comes to Teddy. Brew and I guess we'll give our insights onto Tom's 5th pick. Tom, do you want to let us know who that is?
So with 5th, this is actually a very hard spot to pick from pick 5. And there's a lot of players here on. I think the first 4 pick themselves. And pick 5, I've gone for Latrell Mitchell. And to be honest, I wasn't happy about that pick. I kind of wanted to drift away from the fullbacks. If I had pick 5 in a draft, I think I'm banking on getting a fullback in the middle of the 2nd. Gutho, maybe Ponga if he falls that far. Players like that. And I would take a Cody Walker or possibly Cameron Munster. I think you've got to take Latrell Mitchell. When you go through his stats last year, again, he was injured a bit. He was suspended a lot. He just scored massive last year, and he didn't have that good of a year. Like, when you watched him play, he didn't look that involved. He just leaked SuperCoach points. So Latrell Mitchell at 5, he's the right player there.
Yeah, you touch on that. Like, the thing with Latrell is he had a down year in terms of, if you look at what the media was saying, he had a down year. You look at Cody Walker, who had a simply sensational year according to the media, and don't get me wrong, his numbers were fantastic, but Cody Walker averaged, I think it was 2.1 points more than Latrell, and Latrell picks up the goal kicking next year. We have to remember that. Adam Reynolds has departed. Latrell will be the number 1 choice goal kicker. I am huge on Latrell to the point where if you drafted him at 4 over Tedesco, I wouldn't be upset. Like, I am that high on Latrell I just think he's in for a superstar year. I think it's going to be him and Cody Walker having to run the show completely. I love this pick. You touched on the point of him having to go so early, because I think you guys like your Gutho, your Pongers, your Dufties, even someone like a Hines, if you want to take a little bit higher, like these are your second tier fullbacks, and there is plenty of them this year. If you miss out on Turbo, Pappenhausen, Tedesco, Latrell, I think you can wait for these next tier of fullbacks and plug another position, which I think Brew has done with his next pick.
Am I going to my next pick, or am I talking about Latrell?
Just go to your next pick for us, please, mates.
So my next pick was Harry Grant. So Harry Grant was my next pick because I feel like that is a position where there is very limited guns. Now, I think there's probably going to be 3 guys that you can pick next year at hooker. And if you don't pick them, you're probably going to be in a world of hurt unless you get really lucky. So Grant last year, obviously, he started the season late. He then came back. He got injured again. He then had to work back into it again. He pretty much played last year majorly as a 14 and not as a 9. Whether or not that continues next year, we'll have to see. There's going to be a lot of factors that come into this. If Brandon Smith leaves that club and you're Craig Bellamy, do you go with your gun hooker, or do you continue to play the guy that you know is leaving the club? Personally, I would then move Smith probably to the bench and get him as an impact player off the bench, and I'll be playing Harry Grant for as many minutes on that field as I can. Last season, he averaged 59 minutes. Now, stock standard hookers probably only average around 60 minutes these days, 60, 65, and then you have a bench hooker that takes 15 or 20 off them. Harry Grant is not that guy. Harry Grant is your Cameron Smith. You want him playing 70 to 80 minutes every single week, in my opinion. I feel like he's coming off an injury-hampered season. When he was on the field last year, he had 1.25 ppm. Imagine if that guy gets 70 minutes. You could have a 85 average hooker. That's elite. Like, that's elite for any position. And if you can get that at hooker and bank on getting, a floor of, say, 60, 65 points a week, take that and run, because you'll pick up points every single week on anyone that doesn't have one of those, say, top 3 hookers, so in my opinion.
Grant is an out-and-out stud, no doubt about it. He needs the minutes, and I think he'll get them this year. We've got to remember Nelson Asfa-Solomona is pretty open about being anti-vaxxed, which will hurt his game time. We also see Dale Finucane exit the building, which I think opens up some minutes for Brandon Smith to play a little bit of lock, which definitely helps Harry Grant. Taking him at 6 here, I have no qualms about. You mentioned him being the star-studded option in a pretty weak position. Now, I know that last year in the centre wings, we had guys going off left, right, and centre, Alex Johnson, Josh Addo-Carr, but my 7th pick was the star of the show in the centre wing. He can be your captain option in a draft league. He is a base stat monster. It is none other than Brian To'o. I wouldn't say a breakout year because we know what he's capable of, but definitely put himself into the mainstream sort of area. When it comes to To'o, we know what we're getting from him. Huge base stats, and on the end of a pretty potent Penrith attack. Ryan, do we like taking To'o as high as 7, or is he one of these guys you think might fall out of the top 10?
I think it depends who you ask. I think, obviously someone who knows the draft leagues back to front might find, a bit of value there with To'o at 7. I guess my general rule of thumb when doing a draft is to take, particularly around picks 4, 5, 6, is to take the next or the best player in their respective position. So, for example, like the best fullback is probably already gone with Turbo. The best halfback's already gone with Cleary. And arguably the best hooker already gone with Grant. So to go towards the best CTW at 7, not a bad shout. I guess, as you say there, he's essentially a prop who scores tries, which is unheard of. The amount of work he gets through, it is second to none in that position. So when you can bank on your winger getting 65 points on a bad day out, it's pretty incredible. And obviously playing down that favoured left side of Penrith, it's a scary prospect. I still don't think we've seen the best of Brian To'o.
A prop that plays wing is probably the best analogy that I have heard, mate. Do you want to lead us off into your 8th pick?
Yeah, kind of echoing my sentiments there about picking the next best in their position. I don't think we've had a 5/8 to this point, so that's why I went the way of Cody Walker at pick number 8, which is phenomenal. You think of the best 5/8s from the 2020 season heading into 21, and it was Walker or Munster. It was a race in two, really, before some other names emerged like Adam Dewey. But Walker, what we've seen from him last year is he is the main man in that Souths attack. He'll be even more so again now that Reynolds isn't there. I think that left side, it's almost so predictable that it's still even better because you know it's coming, but you can't stop it. So Cody Walker, what he offers, we've already spoken about Latrell, Alex Johnston, you've mentioned. I think he is the clear pick at number 6, given the fact that Adam Dewey is missing the start of the year with that injury.
Now, am I reading this wrong? Are you on the turn, mate? Do you get 9 as well?
Yeah, that's the way it is. And I know we weren't drafting a team, but it was a little bit hard to kind of do this without being selfish and not looking at who's in your own backyard. So I did go, and this is maybe a little bit of a controversial pick this high up, and I know it got our tongues wagging, but Cameron McInnes, the forgotten man, I think, at pick number 9. Out of sight, out of mind last year, obviously suffered that ACL injury when still at the Dragons at the back end or the start of the 2021 season, finds his way to Cronulla. I'm assuming he's dual position here, and that's why I've picked him this high. I'm thinking he plays hooker and maybe the 2RF slot as well. So Cam McInnes pick 9, and we'll get into reasons why, but I think it could be a value pick of the draft.
You boys cannot see my reaction with the way they're recording, but I threw my hands up in the air instantly. I made this known that Ryan is super high on Cam McInnes, me not so much. I think he'll be good. I just worry about these guns that came in before Peter V'landys ball. We look at guys like Isaiah Yeo who had a falling off, and Cam McInnes plays a very similar role. I like you said, it's hard to not be biased with these draft picks because it's hard to separate yourself from a team aspect. But look, if he can come back firing, he is by far and away probably the best hooker, I would say, over Grant. But I, like many others, I think we're banking on him starting off a little bit slow off an ACL. The one big positive for McInnes, though, is it did happen so early on. So he's had the entire year to get over this and come back in a full preseason. So it's not like he's had the injury in August and he's sitting out until the start of the preseason. He does get a big tick there in my book. It's just it's one of those ones where if we're playing a 10-man draft, I don't know if I can be confident to take McInnes in the first round because your first round pick is essentially your captain for the rest of the year, and it's hard to have McInnes there. I know that Brew is very, very keen on Cam McInnes, so I'll let him sort of lead off on his standpoints.
Yeah, for those listening at home, we did this in a group chat, and when Ryan took Cam McInnes, I was not very happy because I was planning to take him with my next pick. So part of the reason I really like him for draft is because if he's dual, and I feel like he will be dual, I think he will be dual hooker second row because I don't know where he's going to play next year. Can any of you say where he's going to play next year? Probably not. So for that reason, I think he will be dual hooker or second row because they probably don't know where they're necessarily going to play him at the moment. And given that fact, if he ends up playing lock, but he's available at hooker, suddenly you've got a guy that could be playing a minimum of 65 minutes, who we know has attacking upside, who we know can strip them in the ruck. And we're talking about PVL, and we're talking about it negatively. But are you telling me that a guy like Cameron McInnes can't take sneaky runs up the ruck and get line breaks, or get a line break and then have another big bopper who's following inside him, or a 5/8 or a fullback and an inside ball? Then you've got a line break and a try assist as well. You give this bloke 20, 25 attacking stats, suddenly this is a 90 average. Now, obviously, he's not going to do that week in and week out. But if you have a guy that you can pick at hooker or second row who is dual in draft, and you have to factor in that obviously you have bye weeks, et cetera, who you can move around to cover positions, which is more valuable than what you think, that is extreme value for me. So for Classic, I'm very high on him. I've said that previously on podcasts, but I'm very high on him pending price. If he's 700K, not as handy as being 500K. Yeah. But for draft, that dual functionality, his attacking upside, under the new rules and the fact that he's an Iron Man, he can play 80 minutes if need be, he's probably going to get at least 60 minutes. That's all the way to the bank for me. 100% done.
I think also, if you look back at the scores from 2020, I think he scored, I've got it here, he scored over 87 of his 18 games. 4 of those were over 90. So, I mean, suddenly, and this is, you mentioned that PVL ball, and what does that look like for a player like Cam McInnes? He's probably not as explosive as a Cam Murray. I think we'll agree with that. He's probably not as big and robust as an Isaiah Yeo, but he's almost that hybrid. I think he can even play bigger minutes than 60. I mean, I think that's probably being, a little bit generous to Cam. I think he can go on and play 70 upwards. And I guess the question mark is how he fits in with Blake Brayley there for the Sharks, who has traditionally played closer to 80 minutes. And I think if anyone's going to get a rest out of those two, I think it would be Blake. Just the experience of Cam and obviously that ability to play almost the reverse role of Josh Hodgson and start in 13 and then go to 9 and give the more, I guess, explosive, dynamic runner that is Brayley a break. It's a luxury to have for the Sharks.
And he's a very good defender as well. And the other thing you need to factor in is that he's been playing in a poor side. I personally think that the Sharks are a top 6 side next year. If you have him following blokes who are actually really talented and scoring a lot of points, and the Sharks already scored a lot of points last year in a bad side or a mediocre side. If they're going to be, average to possibly really good next year, Cam McInnes is a guy that can really shine off the back of that.
Yeah, look, if this was 2021, if we were drafting this 11 months ago, I'd definitely get behind it. And if you told me he'd come back, what we saw him was, I can get behind this. I'm just worried about the ACL. Look, Tom, you've been sitting there on your hands wanting to say something. Yeah, so I'll let you comment. I'll let you comment on my 10th pick, and we'll round out the top 10, which is David Fifita. Look, machine last year, inconsistent at times, but always found a way to score.
Yeah, that's a fine pick. I want to go back to Cam McInnes. Sorry to go back.
Just biting your tongue there, waiting for Saturn.
Hey, can I ask a question about Cam McInnes?
Of
Are we
course.
too strict for time?
No, mate, you go for it.
What if Craig Fitzgibbon comes out and says he's a lock and SuperCoach has him as 2RF only? What are we doing with him?
I think that decreases his value immensely.
Draft, yes, it probably does limit him a little bit. Classic, and I know we're not talking about classic today, but classic price dependent.
Yeah, I don't think it matters. I don't think it matters for classic because there's a couple of good cheap hookers we can fill in. But if Craig Fitzgibbon come out and said he is playing 13 and 13 alone, and his SuperCoach draft stock was just 2RF, I think that hinders him to potentially pushing outside the top 20.
Yeah, it's hard to disagree, really. I think I guess the reason, and I kind of did an asterisk when I let it be known I was picking him this high, was around his dual position eligibility. It's it's obviously valuable in classic. It's twice as valuable in draft to be able to shift players of that caliber around between, I guess, such a thin position of hooker. Arguably on his day, he could be the best hooker in the game. A little bit like Brandon Smith last year. At times, he was the best hooker option in the game, even though he was sort of playing a mixed role. So it's just, in draft, it's about capitalizing on, I guess, those little inconsistencies or discrepancies in the game itself.
Yeah.
Of course. So, yeah, we'll go back to pick 10. I ended up taking David Fifita. Yeah, I think he scored 17 tries in 21 games or something absolutely ridiculous. The bloke did sort of slip in there at the starting side, was a bit of a liability for 65 minutes of the game, but always found a way to pull it out. And yeah, by far the way the best 2RF, I think, this year with Isaiah Papali'i and his sort of future up in the air. As I said, Tom, are we liking the Fifita pick at 10? Is he warranted to go that high?
That's fine. Personally, I'm not taking David Fifita. When I'm drafting the first 3 rounds, I'm drafting off pure base, and he just. Like, he scored 17 tries. Like, he's a second rower that's scoring 17 tries. Is he going to keep that up? I don't know. Is he a first-round pick if he only scores 10 tries, which is more likely of what's going to happen next year? I don't know. I mean, if he scores that many tries again, then you've got a bargain at 10. But I just can't see it happening. I can't see him scoring that many tries again, and they've lost their halfback. Not that that's... I don't think it makes a massive difference on David Fifita, but surely it impacts him somewhat. Probably something we haven't really considered on David Fafita.
Yeah, before we round off for an intermission break, rounding out the top 10, we'll touch on that Titan spine quickly. Now, Brew and I have touched on this from a classic standpoint. I personally think it'll be Jaden Campbell at 1, and then you probably see AJ Brimson at 6, Toby Sexton at 7, who I really like as well. And if Sexton can link up with Fafita, or even if it's AJ Brimson, I think that could be definitely devastating for them. I've heard Brew's opinion on the spine. Ryan, we've yet to hear your sort of opinion on that weigh-in.
It's a young spine, isn't it? I mean, you look at the purely off not only age, but just NRL experience. I know Campbell came in, set the world on fire. Sexton, you could say the same. Brimson hasn't played a lot in the halves, at least in the NRL. He might have done in junior footy. And then I guess the question is, they've always needed a number 9. So it's tough if you're relying on the Titans spine to bring out the best of David Fafita. It might be an uphill battle. Fafita, yeah, at times. I mean, I owned him in Classic and Draft last year. He was just frustrating to watch because you know how good he can be. And I think that's the toughest thing for the neutrals, but I can only imagine Titans fans who watch, and he's parked on that right side, and just get involved, mate. You are literally the biggest and the best player on the field on every day, but we just don't see it enough from Fafita.
You touched on that young spine, and I think, not too sure if I have my wires crossed, but I think I read a report that Mitch Rain has been released by the Titans to go to Parramatta.
Yes.
So that would
Really?
that would see
Wow.
Aaron Booth, you'd think, come into the top 30 and start, and that even makes the spine, I wouldn't say younger because Aaron Booth is 26, but inexperienced from an NRL level. You've got guys that are all under 26 in that spine, and it'll be a big ask. And if someone needs to lead them, it needs to be their front men in Fafita and Tino Malawi. I know that Brew was itching to say something before we rounded off for intermission.
Yeah, just on Fafita, I don't know if the spine affects him too much. I think if he had a good spine, he'd be even better. Because if you think about it last year, how many times did he score when he picked it up from dummy half? And how many times did he score when he actually spread out wide and moved to centre on the right side? There was a lot of tries. I reckon, I don't know, but I reckon probably nearly half of his tries came from either dummy half or him moving wide of the play. It wasn't necessarily a halfback or a hooker or a 5'8" that was putting him into a hole. It was just him finally going, I want the ball, and doing it himself, which we know he has the strength and capability to do. The problem is he's inconsistent, and he only takes the cheap runs. He doesn't take the hard runs. So does David Fafita in this off-season go, you know what, I'm kind of sick of the media and everyone telling me that I'm lazy? And does he take it upon himself to be the leader in that forward pack? Because if he does that, Tom, you 17 tries, he'll smash that.
Yeah,
but does he have the actual capability to do that week in and week out for a 25-round season? I don't think so.
Can anyone honestly see David Fafita as a leader for pack?
No, he's not your leader. You've got guys like Jared Wallace and Tino to do the hard work, and as Bruce said, he just needs to chime in. If he can chime in more consistently, then I think there's definitely some value. But we'll round up with that. We'll come back with Brew's 11th pick after this quick short break. All right, we are back. I definitely didn't have to stop the Zoom meeting because I'm too poor to afford more. We're off with Brew and his 11th pick, mate. Who have we got?
Yeah, thanks, Tom. With my next pick of the draft, I take Payne Haas. The reason I do this, we've pretty much kind of discussed similar reasons throughout this podcast. He's the best front row forward, in my opinion. It's a shallow position. It's not a very deep position. Every year, classic or draft, it's one of those positions where you're kind of not sure who to take. But one thing you can be sure on is that Payne Haas will probably be the top player in that position. So I'm taking the standout. Kevy tried to cut his minutes back last year. It's all the error in his ways. They played a lot better at the back end of the season when Haas was playing big minutes. So I think Kevy might have learnt from his mistake, and he'll go back to Payne playing, say, at least 65, 70 minutes a week. And if he does, that's all he needs. We know he's going to pretty much go point per minute. We know he's got that upside of a tackle bust, line break, try. He's going to get those from time to time, and that'll push him up over 80 average, or 75, 80, which is elite for that position. You're not going to get many that can come close to that, and that is why I pick Payne Haas.
I think Payne Haas benefits a lot from the alleged, and I repeat, alleged reports are that Adam Blake is standing pretty still on the unvax situation. If AFB was to be playing the full season next year, I think Haas, his value may drop a little bit because you do have that other option. Yeah, I mean, you said that Kevy was looking to play him in lower minutes last year. I think Todd Payton should have a look in the similar mould and just play Tamalolo in big minutes because it's the best thing for the team. But Payne Haas, an absolute weapon last year once he got those minutes back. He's just improving his attacking output week on week.
Yeah.
And he's becoming more of a link man through the middle, which I really like as well. I don't know if I like him at 11. I think we've got some other guys that will come up on this list that I'd prefer to take higher, but I understand the reasoning behind him being the sole front row option. So you're taking the best thing there, which is Ryan's point. Tom, do you want to weigh in on the Haas debate?
Yeah, when the Broncos finally sort their shit out and become good again, Payne Haas is going to score 10 to 12 tries. I do not want to miss out on that year. He's the best front rower. AFB, Haas, daylight, AFB. Haas is the best front row in the competition. And I really like what Ryan said before, that you want, when you're at the back end of a draft, like if you're doing a 12-team draft and you're 11, make sure you get that point of difference player. Don't get the fifth best fullback. Get the number one front rower.
Yep.
Yeah, I think that depends. If you're playing captain's leagues, you want to go for the highest ceiling. If you're playing non-captain's leagues, yeah, try and stuff your draft teammates with, I guess, taking the best player. Tom, you're back on the hook. You picked 4 and 5. You're now on the clock with 12 and 13. Who have you taken at 12?
Yeah, I was spewing. I didn't get Payne Haas at 12 here, but I'm very happy with this pick. I've taken Cameron Munster. Another one of those players that goes under the radar and just seems to score without doing much. Whether that's a little palm off, tackle break and things like this. Like he averaged 74 last year, and I would say he had a terrible year.
Yep.
Like I had him in our FIGJAM Dynasty League all last year, and he just it's just a sort of set and forget captain. 74, not doing much. You just throw the C on him all year. He might get a 45 here and there, but he's going to go next week. He's going to get 95. So I think he's a fairly safe player, and yeah, very happy with him at pick. What am I up to? 12, is it?
Yeah,
I'm not sure about that captain comment because, when Tom Trebojevic is banging out 200 and your captain's banging out 75.
Yeah,
I'm up plus 300. But I will say that Munster, we spoke about a lot last year on the podcast, and I commented on the same thing. Munster does nothing and bangs out 65 every single week. So he's the kind of guy that you can just pick him. You know that he's probably not going to get 200, like I just said with Turbo, but he's going to get you 60 to 80 a week, and you can just bank on that. And for that reason, I don't mind the pick, and I don't think that's a position where there is a plethora of options this year. There's a lot that carry risk, and I'm going to talk about one that carries risks very shortly. But I don't mind Munster because he's very safe. You just need to factor in that he does start the year suspended.
The thing with Munster is, and you watch all these Melbourne Storm games, and I feel like we say this year on year, and when it comes to Supercoach, we say, oh, what if he just puts it all together? What if he just becomes that guy? And I feel like we're saying that year after year, and this is going to age terribly. Someone's going to clip this out when he averages 110 next year, but I feel like he's always just going to be that 75 average guy. Like, I don't know what has to happen for him to become the man, but like it just seems like players around him are continually developing. You look at Hines, you look at Hughes, you look at Poppenhausen. Like these guys are all taking that next step. Look, I'm one of the biggest Queensland fans there is, and Munster in a Queensland jersey is phenomenal. But when it comes to club footy, it just feels like he's just going through the motions a bit, and he looks so deadly, but it just never comes off. He's one of those guys that if you watch, you could say, yeah, 200 score is coming, but it just never comes together. Is that a fair assessment, Ryan?
Absolutely, and I think you've kind of hit it on the head there. It's always next week for Munster, and I think he's almost hurt by how good the Storm are, if that makes sense. And the sheer strike around him, the speed in obviously Pappenhausen goes without saying. Nico Hines last year, even Jerome Hughes, I'd argue, is probably more of an explosive running half than Munster, who almost built his game around that. Dating back to 2015-16. I know he was playing a bit of fullback at the time, but that's how he sort of burst onto the scene as such an explosive, tackle-busting, meter-eating runner. 27 now, turning 28 next year. Maybe he's happy to sort of sit back and take on that more, happy to dish the more
Seniority
speedy
role.
sort of player. Absolutely. And he kind of has to do that, I think, with, Cronk and Smith not there anymore. He is the elder head who's been there for years on end. And it might be good for the Storm, but it might not be so good for super coaches.
Look, I think his Supercoach game is friendly. Like, he will always be that 70 guy. He loves a tackle. He loves a run.
Yeah.
But I just feel like his draft stock year upon year is just falling out the way. Like, we look at American sports, we look at football, we look at basketball. We always talk about these rookies who they're 1 year away. They're 1 year away. And like I said to Ryan, I feel like we're saying that with Munster every year. And he was 23, 24. He was this young, inexperienced head who had all this potential in the world. And we're now 3 or 4 years later, and we're still saying he's this young head full of potential and just doing silly stuff off the field, which I think will hurt his game time. But Tom, you're on the hook, mate. Who are we taking with the 13th pick?
Next pick, I think he picks himself here, Angus Crichton. I think is he the first pure 2RF off the board?
No, for feeder.
I think he might.
No, for feeder.
Oh, for feeder, yeah, that's fair enough. Again, I'm taking Crichton this high because I'm gambling on Cleary to have a massive year, just like Tedesco. Cleary's arguably the second best halfback in the comp, and when he's fit, and I think Angus Crichton is going to absolutely feed off that. So, yeah, he averaged 74.5 last year. Angus Crichton again didn't have a great year. Roosters didn't have a great year. If the Roosters are all fit and firing, Angus Crichton's going to score 15 tries, and he's going to average 90 points. So I'm taking Angus Crichton at 13.
As the Roosters fan, Brew, weigh in on Angus Crichton. My biggest risk, or not my biggest risk, my biggest thing with him from a classic and a draft standpoint is the fact that he will breathe on a guy, and it seems to be getting 2 weeks now with his judiciary record.
Yeah. I'm not really going to factor that into my decision making. I'm just going to hope that Trent Robinson fixes those little indiscrepancies out of his game. What I will say is that Tedesco had his second best season last year, and Angus Crichton had, Tom, you called it a disappointing season. And I guess it was a disappointing season.
I think the whole Roosters had a disappointing season.
But
they still come fourth.
That's the thing. Like,
they finished fifth. You're going to have a second year out of Walker. He's going to be bigger. He's going to be stronger. You're going to have Cleary back. You're going to have your forwards back. You're going to get Lindsay Collins back and getting a bit of stock into that pack. Like, you say they had a bad year, but can you imagine the side if they click next year?
That's what I'm saying. Like,
they could be elite. They could be Penrith, Melbourne level from the last 2 years this coming year.
The only question mark on...
And if they are, I can't really knock any of these picks of the Roosters players, but it is a massive risk. And that's coming from a Roosters fan because you're asking Cleary to be the main difference maker. You're still going to have a relatively green halfback who's undersized.
The thing is
still going to have... Yeah, go.
The thing is, like, I think Crichton's a huge tick because of how weak your left centre situation is. If Cleary is going to the line on the left-hand side and he looks out and sees a Sawali, a Billy Smith or whoever, and he sees Angus Crichton run the great hole, I think I know who I'm hitting. So I think that's a big plus for Crichton. The fact that the men on his outside, or not Tupou, but the men on his outside in whoever the centre will be, I think Crichton's going to see a lot more ball with Cleary back.
100%. And I don't argue that. And I'm going to hold a little bit of ammo for later in the preseason when we go through team analysis. But like Verrills or Watson, and I debated this last podcast, whoever starts hooker, they're both very good passes from right to left. That's going to go into his favour. Cleary, we know, can put anybody through a hole at any given time, and we know that Teddy sweeps. So there's so much plus for Angus. I don't knock it. Do I think that he was the best player in the position on the draft board right now? I disagree with that. I think we probably could have taken him later, but I did the same thing. I got a little bit stuck on picking my own draft side with some of my picks, and you'll see that with my next pick that I don't knock Tom for it. I don't know if he is number 14 or whatever we're up to, but is he the second best edge back rower in this class? Yes, 100%.
Just on Angus before we move on here, something it's probably hard to put into numbers, and I know we do this primarily 99% based off numbers from years gone by and obviously assessing team trades and form and such, but something you can't put into numbers is having games back at the cricket ground, or at least back in Sydney for the Roosters. They made that place a fortress in, I think it was 19, or it might have been 18, 19, whenever they went to go and win the comp. And Trent Robertson speaks about what he does and the emphasis he puts on playing at the cricket ground. I think what we saw from the Eels in 2019 when they went to Bank West, they scored 10 points per game more at home in 2019 as opposed to they did in 2020 when they were on the road with no crowds. Not saying it's going to be the case for the Roosters, but obviously I think there is some merit in their back playing in front of their home fans at the cricket ground. Such a unique place to play rugby league. The Roosters could benefit from that again.
Yeah, great.
Yeah,
great,
and I
great
100% agree with that. Sorry to chime in, but we're talking about the Roosters, so I can't not. I will get stats for whenever we do a Roosters podcast later in the year on this, because their winning record at the SCG was phenomenal. They won like 14 from 15 games the last season that Brian was talking about. And I think it was 2019, the year they won the comp. I'll get some statistics on it because I know they scored at least 30 plus, and I think 80% of those games.
On the Angus Crichton situation, Brew, you mentioned picking high ceiling players, and your next pick, it's gonna raise some eyebrows, I feel, mate.
Yeah, this one might be a little bit controversial. So I picked Nico Hines, and I know people are on the fence with Nico Hines for next season. And don't get me wrong, I've talked negatively already in our preseason about Nico Hines from a classic perspective, but draft doesn't have prices. So you're not paying a price for him. You're picking a position. And this guy should have dual position. It's just whether he's dual 5'8" halfback or whether he's dual halfback, fullback 5'8", whatever direction they go, he'll be dual. So there is a benefit there. And that I said it earlier, it comes in massive advantage at some point during your draft season if you have dual position players. So for that reason, I picked him. You've potentially got a guy that's going to be a goal kicking half. In this day and age, there's not that many gun goal kicking halves or goal kicking 5'8". So if you can take one that's a dual, and if he was to be 5'8", which I think might be a weak position this year, I'm not super high on Cody Walker next year. I think he's going to buckle under the pressure of not having Adam Reynolds in that side. And I think it's going to get to him. We've seen in the past that sometimes in high pressure situations, he folds like a deck of cards. I can see that happening to him next year. He's probably not a guy I'm going to start classic with. And that might be a hot take, but for me, I think he's probably going to, without Reynolds, really suffer. So I think there's opportunities here at 5'8". And for that reason, if he was to be available at 5'8", he's someone I'd definitely take a chance on.
Mate, I don't think Cody Walker is the hot take thing you've said there. I've seen where Ryan's projected Hines to go. Bruce, take this one off, mate. Grab the driver out of the bag. I'll let you tee off on this one.
Look, the beauty of draft is it's so subjective, right? And Brew makes some great points there, which I can't really argue with. But what I asked a couple of questions about Nico Hines on my Instagram during the week when I was sort of assessing draft options and prospects for next season. The first one is can he lead a team week in, week out as the man, as the playmaker? And that's what he's going to Cronulla to be, right? Obviously, they've got some young halves there with Trindle and Metcalf, and I think Moylan will play some sort of role there. But the dual position thing, and I'll just touch on that quickly before we move this on. The beauty of Hines being dual position last year, I feel, was the centre wing eligibility. You weren't playing Hines as, well, I know I wasn't personally playing him as a fullback. The value was purely as the CTW. If he does get in as a dual position this year, which I agree, I think he will, but I think he'll be a fullback, 5'8". I don't think he'll be a halfback, or he'll be one of the half slots and a fullback. I think he just played too many minutes last year at fullback, so they got to put him there. Again, in a draft league, am I playing Nico Hines at fullback ahead of one of the better fullback options, which you've already mentioned? Probably not. To pick him at pick 14, is he the best? Well, I'll say this. Is he the second best or third best 5'8"? TBC. We don't know because we haven't seen enough.
He definitely could be, and that's the thing. He
could be.
He could be. But
are you risking a pick at pick 14?
Exactly. And that's what I was going to say. Is could be good enough for pick 14? I don't think it is. I think there's one man that we have left off. Look, he does get drafted. I think he drafted 19th or 20th. That I think has been massively slept on. Who could fill a job better at halfback than what Hines can. I understand the goal kicking, but there's a lot of moving pieces to come into the Shark side. An inexperienced coach coming out of a good system, yes, but it's just a lot of moving pieces to happen for Nico Hines to hit the ground running. If he finds form with what he did last year, going to be unreal. I just worry about him having the ball closer to the ruck rather than at fullback, which is what he did last year, and being able to finish off a lot more. I have the 15th pick. This is a very safe pick, but I think it's hard to argue in taking Cam Murray. Now, the guy is just coming into his own week in, week out, year after year, tipped to be the Australian captain in a couple of years, an experienced head on a young set of shoulders. He will give you his all week in, week out. Tom, we haven't heard from you. What are our thoughts on Cam Murray going somewhere in the mid-second round?
Yeah, I think it's fine. I can't really argue with it. There's a few high upside players that get picked after Cam Murray that I would take ahead of him. Yeah, it's going to be interesting South next year. No Bennett. There's a hooker at South who we haven't talked about yet. And I think Souths are going to revolve a lot around him this year, unleashing. And if he does get unleashed, then players like Cam Murray, Cody Walker, and Latrell Mitchell could go ballistic. But yeah, it's going to be really interesting. No Reynolds, no Bennett. I don't know. Is that no South? It's really hard to say. But yeah, Cam Murray, just in tackles alone, he's going to get 50 points. So he's a fine pick in the middle of the second.
And then you made the point, if another one of these Cam Munce situations, we keep saying if Damien Cook can find this thing with these new rules, Cam Murray is going to be the biggest winner out of that. So time will tell. It's a very safe. Sure. It's a very safe pick. I think he's a safe 65 points, regardless of what happens, with the upside of going 80, 85. Ryan, you're on the turn, mate.
Yep. Pick 16. I went with Jerome Hughes. I think probably cemented himself last year alone as the second best halfback option in my eyes anyway, behind Nathan Cleary.
Ooh,
I guess a knock on him is he doesn't kick goals. Yeah, I mean, I just think what we've seen, I've already sort of mentioned about the running role that he has. Melbourne have almost gone the other way, whereas they turned the fullback role from a fullback into a half. They've almost turned their halves into fullbacks. I mean, Slater was the quintessential one that played 6 almost, and Hughes is almost the 6, or the one which also plays 7 now. But Hughes, 16. I think we weren't drafting teams, but it's hard not to grab a halfback at pick 16.
Definitely. And with 17, mate, who are we taking?
Yeah, this is sort of where I went away from that team mantra and just grabbed the next best player, who I thought was Kalen Ponga, pick 17. Traditionally a top 10 player in years gone by. So to get him late in the second, I think it's a value pick.
I think there's a lot of question marks surrounding Ponga, which have him fall to 17. So I think it's a perfectly fine pick this late on. And if Ponga does fall out of your top 10 in your drafts, I wouldn't be too surprised. We've got no Mitchell Pearce next year. We know that Ponga benefits very well off him. Goal kicking was a big concern for Ponga last year. It looks like he's been taken over by Clifford. Looks to be at the moment Adam Clune is going to line up as the 7 potentially with the new recruit, or even someone like a Phoenix Crosland. Ponga is looking to play both sides of the field. We know that he performs best on the left-hand side. He's trying to expand his game, which I think is going to hurt SuperCoach. And I think the gap between him and your Latrells, Teddies, and Paps, I think it's just too much to be taking him in what we've taken him in previous years. Brew, your head's down. I hope you're prepared. I'm going to come to you with the Ponga analysis.
So with Ponga, I actually, in hindsight, can't believe that he didn't go top 10. I just think his upside of 150 plus in the highest scoring position, we probably got it a little wrong and went a little bit team-based. I honestly, in a real draft with 10 or 12 blokes, I don't know how you can't take him in the top 10. And if he does fall out of the top 10, my advice would be to take him, because I don't think you're going to get a season as bad as he had last year. We know what he can do, and last year was shithouse. It really was. As soon as Clifford came, he fell off a cliff. Clifford kind of kept going. He kept going to Pearce, and he kept cutting out Ponga, and Ponga was just sitting out the back going, "Give me the ball," but he wasn't demanding it. And I think in the off season, that coach is going to say to him, "You demand this ball." He's not going to say, "You're the best player on this team, demand the ball," but that is essentially what the Knights need to do, because without Pearce, it's going to fall on Ponga, because you're not going to get it from Clifford or Clune. Clune's very good, and I think he would actually be a good player for them, because I think he was severely underrated by the Dragons. They don't see the good in him. He was far better at controlling that team than Corey Norman was. But Kalen Pong is a match winner, not winger. And they need to give him the ball more. So for me, he's that 10 to 15 range, no later.
It feels like I'm the only one on the anti-Ponga train here. I just worry that they use him similar to a Fafita, where he's just like, all right, you chime in when you need to. Whereas in his earlier years, it was all Ponga, give me the ball. Similar to a Reece Walsh this year. I just worry that he falls off a cliff a little bit. I'll make a bold prediction as it stands now. Ponga is averaging under 75 next year. I'll put my hammer in the ground.
Munster was
at
11, average 74.
Yeah, but the thing with Munster is he doesn't have that bottoming floor that Ponga does. Like you won't see Munster go for 20, whereas I feel like Ponga can just fade. And at fullback, in a side that is being dominated, you're not going to get as many chances. Whereas if you're at 6, you're still going to get your hands on the pill and do something with it. And Munster is a much safer pick than Ponga, because Ponga does have that huge upside, as Brew has touched on, but I feel like he's just got a crushing floor, and we saw that at the end of last year. And until proven otherwise, I'm happy to have Ponga outside the sort of top 14, 15. In saying that, it is my next and last pick, and for as much as we've spoken about him, and as much as everyone is raving about him, he's fallen to 18 to me, and if he fell to 18 in your draft, I'd be jumping all over the moon, and it is one Luke Cleary. Ryan, are you a believer as much as these other two numbnuts are as to he's going to set the world alight?
I don't know about numbnuts, but absolutely. I think Cleary, what he brings to this team is, again, it's hard to put into numbers, really. The leadership qualities, he's an origin level half, or at least he has been in the past. The question mark, I know you questioned McInnes going so early, coming off an injury. Cleary, obviously the same injury. I think he's older than we actually think he is, Luke Cleary, as well.
About 28, 29.
20, I thought 26, 27, but he is deceivingly older.
Yeah, he's got that baby face, which sort of, I guess, makes you think he's just burst on the scene. But yeah. Anyway, long story short, I think Cleary, obviously, he is in the elite half in the NRL. How that translates into SuperCoach coming off an injury, I think he'll obviously be benefited by the players we've already mentioned in Tedesco and Crichton. Interesting with Cleary is I think in the past he has kicked goals, and obviously Roosters' goal kicking last year was atrocious. I think they went through 4 or 5 different goal kickers at different stages. So if he can bed down the goal kicking, which is something we haven't mentioned yet about Cleary, but if he can take that off a Takayahau or even a Sam Walker, who was okay off the tee, he wasn't brilliant, Sam Walker. Suddenly Cleary's probably a top 10 level player, given, again, we've already spoken about Cleary, and of course Nico Hines about halves who kick goals. Cleary could just be the golden goose here.
The thing that I really like about Cleary, and it's got nothing to do with him, it's the fact that New South Wales won Origin last year. Now, I think Freddie's a very brave man to break up the Luai-Cleary combination. So that surely sees more game time for Cleary over that period. And no disrespect to Drew Hutchinson, but Cleary is by far and away a more superior player. He's going to... I think Robbo's going to run a lot of his offense through Cleary. I think Sam Walker is still so young, and now he's going to have an experienced elite half to sort of look at and mould off. So I think it's all going to run through Cleary. I think Teddy's going to be a big winner out of that. I think Crichton, as we've touched on. And look, are we happy to take him as high as 18 with the injury history? Obviously, if he is fully fit, he could borderline be top 10. But with the injury history, I'm not as worried as a McInnes, because he's not going to have to run up and down the line of scrimmage and make 40 tackles a game. But yeah, if he is fully fit, top 10, but at 18, are we happy?
So why at the start of 2021, Luke Cleary was fully fit? Now, I've just raved about Luke Cleary all podcast. I love the bloke. And I think he's the centerpiece of the Roosters, possibly winning the comp next year. But why Luke Cleary was fully fit at the start of 2021 and he was a 4th round pick? Why is he now suddenly a 2nd round pick?
What did he do in the first 2 rounds?
He went huge.
What did he show? What did he show with a lack of quality, not quality, but like a lack of ball playing experience around him? No Victor Radley as well. It all fell down to him. We saw exactly what he did, and he was devastating. And I think if you can get the stack of Teddy Cleary, you are in dreamland.
Also, one thing we haven't touched on yet is the Roosters, and obviously, I don't know, maybe a long bow to draw, but mentioned the SCG factor, but we also haven't touched on yet the amount of experience they've lost in Cordner, Friend, the Morris brothers. Again, it's hard to put into numbers in Supercoach terms what that brings to a team. Suddenly, these guys are going to be looking to Cleary, a premiership winner, an Origin player. He is the man now, and I think even in Cronk's shadow, even though they won comps together, he wasn't the man. He won the Clive Churchill. He still wasn't the man. Everyone was talking about Cronk after that grand final. Like, I think Cleary is now finally, it's taken a couple of years. He's played along some great halves in Reynolds and then obviously Cooper Cronk. He's the man. He has to be the one for the Roosters. I think that is the difference.
Tom, you were asking what his scores were in the sort of first 2 rounds. He went 70 and 123 against Manly and the Tigers. Did went for a 33 against I think it is here the Bunnies, but that was the game he did his injury. So that is an average of. That is an average of what
about 2020? He was always sort of considered like a low base half, like he was a Cooper Cronk type Supercoach player at the start of last year.
I just think he's adding more strings to his bow, and we saw that in the first 2 rounds. There's some more taking on the line.
Ryan made some good points about him being the man there at the Roosters.
Ryan's made many good points this podcast, so awesome. I think it's Brew with the 19th pick, and we'll wrap things up very, very shortly.
Before I do that, I'll just say one thing. I do not in any way, shape, or form support picking Cleary. And that's for a Roosters fan. So I'll just leave it at that, and I'll discuss that more when we discuss the Roosters later in the season. I will go on to my pick, which is Daly Cherry Evans.
Yeah, this is what I can't. Sorry to cut you off, bro. I cannot get my head around how the fact that we've let DC here slip to 19. All of us. I just put up a post.
How did you take Cleary?
That's what I'm saying. Like I can't understand how. I think I fell into the trap of picking a team as well. I thought like I've got Cleary here. Let's take Cleary. Like, and that's.
I think we probably all did, and it might have been a little bit affected by the fact we did this with just 4 experts rather than do it with 12 guys. So that probably did affect some of our decisions. But on to Cherry Evans. So Cherry Evans in the last 10 rounds of the season scored, I think it was 6 tons. Some of those tons were massive. I think his 5-round average was nearly 100. I think I've got it. I'll try and bring it up. So 119 was his 3-round average to finish the season. 99 was his 5-round average. Now, I didn't work out his 10-round average, but if you've got 6 tons in there, it's going to be pretty bloody big. That's phenomenal. And that is the Tom Trbojevic factor. You get Manly ripping and tearing at full strength, which they pretty much were at the back end of the season. Cherry Evans going to profit from that. It's not always going to be Tom Trbojevic. There's going to be periods where the key man in that team that is not named Tom Trbojevic, that is Daly Cherry Evans. So he's gonna benefit heavily from that. And in my opinion, he is the second best halfback in the comp, and he would be my second picked at halfback.
Agreed. Tom, you are rounding off our 20-man mock draft where, to peel back the curtain, it took us, I don't know, what, the good part of 15 minutes to put this together. We didn't sit down and work this out. Closer to the season, we'll get you two back on and we'll actually do a proper mock draft, and we'll get all things sorted for the people out there. But Tom, with the last pick of the draft, you alluded to him before
Yeah, I'm taking Damien Cook, and I'm absolutely stoked to get him at 20. It's a massive gamble, and I'm gambling on Damien Cook taking control of South Sydney in 2022. They've got so many weapons there, but they haven't got a leader. They haven't even got Wayne Bennett, who is to be a leader. So I think it's Damien Cook's year. He averaged 65 last year, had a horrible Supercoach year. He has the ability to win a matchup by himself in draft, I noticed. So he might have a down week. He might score a 35, but then the next week he'll score 135, completely out of the blue. It might be a terrible matchup, and he'll score 135 against Melbourne or something crazy like that. And you just go, he just scored 32 against the Bulldogs, and you think, okay, my opponent's got Cookie against the Storm, and you're like, oh, shit it in this week. Here's another dub. And then he just goes and scores a ton. And that's why I'm taking Cookie, because he has the ability to win a head-to-head matchup by himself pretty much. And it's Damien Cook. Like, you can't leave him out of your top 20.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head there. Like, if you're looking at your draft at 4:30 on a Sunday afternoon, you're down by 100, you've just got Cookie to play, you're never out of it. You might lose by 70 on the occasional week, but you might also get the dub. And that's the thing. It's one of these potential things we keep talking about with these new rule changes. We thought Damien Cook would become the second coming of whoever you want to put. Bloody Bryce Cartwright 2016 times with Cameron Smith playing hooker. Like, we thought that he would just be the man. And unfortunately, it hasn't done that, but there's always that upside with Cookie. Yeah, go, Brew.
I was going to say just Damien Cook pre Wayne Bennett. Basically, we thought that's what he was going to become. Tom, I will say this: you've actually inspired me on your talk about.
Thank you.
About them minus those two. I'm actually going to do some research on Damien Cook pre Wayne Bennett and compare it to his stats during that time, because I think you're right. I think if he was unleashed and went back to his running days at hooker, he could be anything. Like, he could be the number one guy like he was 3 years ago. So you've actually inspired me. By the time we do a South Sydney podcast, Josh and I will have research done, and I will personally deliver it to you and give you that stats.
Gentlemen, that is the top 20. There are some big names that are missing. The ones off the top of my head: Gutho, Isaiah Papali'i, Ruben Garrick. I mean, Ruben Garrick was the second most point scorer last year, not on the top 20. Matt Duffy.
Jason Taumalolo,
another big one. Like, there is a lot of depth in draft. For you guys that have never played draft, I would recommend doing it. It's a bundle of fun. You become very attached to your team. It's not like Classic where you can just flick players after they've had a week or two of poor results. Draft is extremely fun. Like, you get a lot of enjoyment out of it. You grow a bond to your players, and I'm sure that myself, Brew, Ryan, and Tom will all be making plenty of draft content this year. Don't flame us too much in the comments. As I said, this draft took about 15 minutes to complete. I have dropped my top 10 over on my Instagram at SC Whisperer. Ryan has been dropping a lot of player profiles with the new recruits over on his socials, which is just SuperCoach365. As always, Brew, I'll be joined by your ugly head probably next week if we'll find something to talk about. Tom, we'll get you back on during the preseason, but you're doing a lot of great stuff in the NFL community. For you guys out there that do play a bit of fantasy football, I recommend checking out FIGJAM Dynasty Sports. You'll most likely see mine and Brew's face every Thursday night. Chatting a lot of waffle. Boys, it's been a pleasure to have you all on. Ryan, thank you very much.
Cheers, Phil.
Tom, thank you.
Boys.
Tom, thank you for coming on. And
Thanks, Joshy.
And Brew,
Tom, Ryan, good job, boys.
And Brew, you just, yeah.
Keep on keeping
I
on,
don't
buddy.
know, mate.
Ciao for now, guys.
Ciao for now, guys.